Good evening. Tonight, incompetence, panic and no plan, the dysfunction of Boris Johnson's government laid bare at the COVID inquiry. Messages reveal the former PM's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, warned the NHS was going to implode like a zombie apocalypse film, while diaries record Johnson favouring letting the elderly catch COVID to prevent further lockdowns. Keir Starmer insists the war in the Middle East isn't tearing the Labour Party apart as he's forced to defend the shadow cabinet's position on the war. And as Matt Hancock endures a reality TV military interrogation, we'll look back at politicians who've traded the ballot box for prime-time exposure with mixed success. All that and lots more with Guto Harri and John McDonnell, who are here to give their take for the next hour. It's Tuesday. I'm Beth Rigby, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Today at the COVID inquiry, we listened to another string of damning revelations about what went on in No.10 during the pandemic. There was arresting and shocking language. Most of it I can't repeat here. The former PM's powerful chief of staff, Dominic Cummings, described the cabinet as useless F-pigs and morons. The cabinet office was a dumpster fire, while that woman, the deputy cabinet secretary, needed to be handcuffed and taken out of Downing Street. Shocking and awful, but don't let that distract you from this, because what we learnt today is hugely significant. We learned Boris Johnson believed the UK should let old people contract COVID to protect the young from lockdowns, according to diary entries of his chief scientific officer, Sir Patrick Vallance. He said the Prime Minister appeared obsessed with older people accepting their fate. Also laid bare the lack of preparedness for dealing with a pandemic and dithering in Downing Street over locking down in March 2020. What's been revealed in the gut of No.10 back then is worse than I imagined, and for many people who lost relatives, these revelations will be hard to bear. But with so many of those who played a role in this crisis now out of No.10, who, if anyone's going to carry the can? We'll be discussing that on tonight's show. But first, let's get a roundup of what happened today at the COVID inquiry. Here's our deputy political editor, Sam Coates.
Wind up this press conference now, because I think
while he was running the country, two men were rarely far from his side. Top advisors Dominic Cummings, communications chief Lee Kane, Boris Johnson's closest aides, now revealing the chaos that engulfed his government.
How's your eyesight, Mr. Cummings?
Mr. Cummings was at the heart of power in a time of crisis. He now says the whole system was unfit and unprepared.
We realised gradually as we pushed and probed and asked questions for these plans that they fundamentally didn't exist. No.
For 4 hours, he set out what he sees as the scale of the failure and what was to blame.
Like all dysfunctional systems, it was a mix of a lot of the wrong people in the wrong job, decades of accumulated power, no real scrutiny and insight, a culture of constantly classifying everything to hide mistakes and hide scrutiny.
The inquiry heard an extraordinary array of foul language, messages and emails littered with the strongest expletives, laying bare the loathing between senior government figures.
I think I was reflecting a widespread view amongst competent people at the centre of power at the time about the calibre of a lot of senior people who are dealing with this crisis extremely badly.
Do you feel that you expressed your views too trenchantly, that your opinion of ministers and of the cabinet overstated the position?
No, I would say, if anything, it understated the position.
His boss was not spared the same disdain. In WhatsApp messages to Lee Kane in March 2020, Cummings said of Boris Johnson, "I've literally said the same thing 10 effing times and he still won't absorb it. I'm exhausted just talking to him and stopping the trolley," their nickname for Mr. Johnson. "I've had to sit here for 2 hours just to stop him saying stupid expletive." Mr. Kane replied, "I'm exhausted with him." The former spin doctor took the stand earlier in the day, he too turning on his old boss.
It was the wrong crisis for this Prime Minister's skill set. He's somebody who would often delay making decisions, would often seek counsel from multiple sources and change his mind on issues.
New evidence was presented from the diaries of the science advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance. They showed the Prime Minister apparently willing to let COVID spread through the elderly. Mr Vallance quotes Johnson saying he agrees with the Conservative Chief Whip that we should let old people get it. Rivka's 72-year-old father died from COVID in early 2020.
I have to say, this talk today about age and how people over 80 were dying, therefore it doesn't matter, let's, make room for younger people. I mean, that is absolutely horrific speak. The language that was being used just speaks volumes about the attitude. There's a callousness and a lack of humanity that probably led to loss of life.
Behind this door, through 2020, Boris Johnson and team were trying to deal with the worst crisis for Britain since the Second World War. And everyone wanted to cut them some slack, hoping, praying that they'd make the best decisions for the country. Today, we heard about the hatreds, the contempt, the dysfunction. There was no pandemic plan, just people lying about there being a pandemic plan. We had an unfocused, indecisive Prime Minister, at one point apparently willing to write off an entire older generation. The question is whether today's hearings shame future politicians into making sure this never happens again.
Once compared to a Rolls-Royce, when the machinery of state was properly tested by COVID, the systems didn't work and the people fell out with one another. It will take a lot to rebuild. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
And Sam's hot-footed it back from number 10 and is with me now in the studio. Sam, I mean, where to start with today? So much evidence, so much information. What was your most memorable moment, your most standout moment from sifting through it all?
Well, there were 6 hours of testimonies. You can't hear all of it now. And I think it's important not to be dragged down the personal criticism, although, oh my God, Beth, some of the personal stuff is amazing. In November 2020, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, wrote to Dominic Cummings about briefings he thought that Dominic Cummings was doing. Why are you saying, I'll be out in 6 months, that I can't take decisions, that Carrie is forging lockdown policy, his wife? This is a total orgy of narcissism by the government that should be solving a national crisis. He sent that message, and 1 minute later, his most senior advisor blocked him on WhatsApp, stopped him from being able to get communication. That is extraordinary in itself. As a sort of drive-by moment, there was an admission that all that stuff about herd immunity that we were told wasn't true, was true. But for me, the biggest thing is not about the personal. It's not about the lying. It's the fact that at the moment of greatest crisis for this country, the senior politicians pulled the lever, said, can we have the emergency plan, please? And it wasn't there. There was nothing from the Civil Contingency Secretariat, that bit at the heart of government that has the plan to save us all. And the fact there was nothing there, they didn't hold the information, didn't hold the document, there was nothing to look at, for me is actually quite scary. It speaks to a dysfunction in the British state I think I hadn't appreciated existed.
Yeah, and it was clear, wasn't it, in the evidence that in February, March, there wasn't a plan, there was dithering over what to do at a time when there was massive uncertainties, which brings me to the next question. What do you think the consequence is? Like, if we take all of this, if you strip away the lurid language and the shocking revelations about just the way people spoke to each other and of each other, what are the main consequences for you, do you think?
I mean, it's just an enormous rebuilding job. It's an enormous rebuilding job for trust in government and politicians. But clearly, also, Whitehall looks broken, totally broken. The people look perhaps of insufficient calibre, that the mechanisms don't work, that the plans aren't there. This requires entire new leadership in Whitehall, in the civil service, I suspect. I think there's a long way to go. It won't be about the report that this COVID inquiry generates. It's going to be about whether or not politicians feel shamed into forcing change soon.
And just quickly, final thoughts, Sam. Simon Case, most senior civil servant, what do you think those consequences for him is? Are you picking anything like that up from MPs?
I think that there is a widespread belief that Simon Case who is off long-term sick at the moment, and this is not a comment on that, it cannot be for that to remain the most senior civil servant in the country, given the way he talks about the people he works alongside. That doesn't feel to me to be sustainable. Step one of the rebuilding is for him to go.
OK, fascinating, Sam. Thank you so much. And well done for getting that reported. That must have been quite a job tonight. Well, look, let's get reaction now from former Downing Street Director of Comms under Boris Johnson, Guto Harri, and former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell. I mean, Guto, let's start with you. You know, we're talking about consequences. Lots of people involved in this have now left Number 10. Is there a consequence for Simon Case? What should happen in terms of carrying the can here?
I think Sam is brilliant in his analysis and right to point a finger at Simon Case, because we'll get back to the individual politicians in due course, but the machine did not work. The machine did not work last year when I was there. There wasn't this crisis last year. It worked extremely well on the Ukraine because it was run by ex-military people in the Ministry of Defence with a first-rate Secretary of State and great people in Number 10 handling that. But on other things, you can't get the data. You pull levers and they're not attached to anything. And at the heart of this machine is a man who somehow was in the room when the Prime Minister and the teetotal Chancellor got a Partygate fine, and yet he didn't. And a man who was at the heart of all this COVID inquiry, and we're now told will never appear, even though the inquiry will carry on for another 3 years.
Do you think he'll have to leave government, ultimately?
Well, it's very hard to see how the machinery of government and the flaws at the heart of it can be exposed so profoundly, and the man who is meant to preside over the machine not escape criticism.
And John, what, you know, you must have watched some of it today. What did you make of it all?
Shocking. And if I was one of the relatives who lost someone, I'd be absolutely devastated, as well as being really angry, to be honest. And what we found out was exactly the machinery of government didn't work, but actually let's not scapegoat individual civil servants, because the civil servants are largely appointed by the Prime Minister, those around him. In addition to that, if you're a politician and you realise the machine's not working, you start taking decisions to make sure you put it right. And what we discovered today, that actually... one thing I do agree with Dominic Cummings is that Boris Johnson wasn't fit to be the Prime Minister. You know, this idea he's a trolley, couldn't make a decision or couldn't stick with a decision, couldn't get it implemented. Then he had appointed around him people who were incompetent but also viciously infighting. It was an appalling scenario. But I look at it from one of the relatives. They must be devastated by this.
I mean, Guto, Lee Kane, your predecessor, one of your predecessors, said that he was the wrong man for the job. Was he?
I think for a different reason. It was torture for somebody like Boris Johnson, who is, wants to drive, but has this irrepressible belief in Britain, has a sense that we've got to halt the decline, that we are yet capable of the sunny uplands, that people deserve to make decisions about their own lives and livelihoods themselves. It was, for him personally, a tragedy to be at the helm when whoever was there had to do the exact opposite. Tell people you can't see your relatives, you can't open your restaurant, you can't go into work. That's a different point of view.
This is what, I mean, look, he changes strategic direction every day. He cannot lead. He cannot support him leading with this approach. The team captain can't change the calls on the big plays. He has a weak team. He can't succeed. The guy's making it impossible. I could go on. Lee Kane said, if you work for him, you'll become exhausted. I mean, do you recognise this guy? You must do a bit.
Only a little bit. So Boris hates confrontation. He doesn't like upsetting people, and that sometimes means he's a bit soft. And sometimes he leaves two people who've advocated different courses of action with the impression that he's agreed with both of them. And that has to be teased out. But that has been managed successfully in the past by better people, frankly, than the people we saw today. People who are working for him and had his back. I think what we saw today...
Do you think Dominic Cummings has betrayed him, let him down?
What we saw today was not just betrayal, but we saw the dysfunctionality was down to the core. The three core people who were there to guard his back were actively undermining him. No Prime Minister, even your dream Prime Minister, could cope with a situation where Judas is behind him in the face of three people who are literally making life impossible.
There are moral questions here as well. That decision that Johnson took where he said, why are we sacrificing the economy to protect people who are going to be dead anyway? that crude lack of moral judgment, I think, betrays it as well.
I'm sure when he has his day in the COVID inquiry, he will dispute that.
Well, we'll hear, but the problem...
But it was in Patrick Vance's diaries.
It was...
As a third-party account of what he thought was in the mind of the Prime Minister when he was testing the argument.
That's the problem, isn't it? Because people really didn't know what was in his mind, because it varied from 1 minute to the next. He never stuck to a decision, and he was willing to sacrifice people's lives, unfortunately.
OK.
That's the tragedy of it.
I'm going to have to move on, but don't go anywhere, because we've got lots more to discuss. Thank you both. Now, in the last hour, we've had details of a phone call between Rishi Sunak and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We're told the PM stressed the importance of rapidly increasing the flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The other interesting line briefed out from Number 10 is that Sunak noted on this call the importance of all sides avoiding actions that would inflame tensions. Well, there are reports tonight that dozens of people have been killed in an explosion at a refugee camp inside Gaza. In the last hour, IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari has given a briefing to Sky security and defence editor Deborah Haynes, who's in southern Israel, with the latest.
He was very keen, wasn't he, to talk about this, wanted to talk about this strike that happened today in the Jabalia area in northern Gaza, where the Israeli military say that they have killed a senior Hamas commander who they say, this man, he's called Ibrahim Biari, who they say was a commander of the central Jabalia battalion, and that he was one of the figures behind the October the 7th atrocity that took place in Israel. But he said that in the course of this strike, a number of other Hamas fighters were also killed, but also saying in a statement as well that's been released that some of there was infrastructure beneath the buildings collapsed, which then obviously was part of this strike. And we've been hearing separately reports about dozens of people that have been killed at the Jubalia refugee camp. And a director of a hospital has told Sky News that there have been, it's a boom, probably a boom of an airstrike. There have been quite a few airstrikes this evening that we've been hearing. The director, of the Indonesian hospital in Gaza saying that there have been hundreds of people injured and killed. And the spokesperson then also, he didn't address anything else other than the strike against this specific commander, but he did make that point, didn't he, about how Israel has warned, urged Palestinian civilians in the north of Gaza to move south, and also Israel always continually says how Hamas, as part of its strategy, embeds itself with the people, with civilians, using civilians as human shields. But of course, there is huge pressure on Israel too to ensure that while countries like the UK and the US fully support Israel's right to self-defence, its right to conduct this war against Hamas, is putting pressure on Israel to ensure that when it operates, it is proportionate and it is careful and does all it can to minimise civilian harm. And tonight, as we're going into another night of operations on the ground with troops on the ground, hunting, fighting with Hamas militants, launching in these airstrikes, but the civilians too living in absolute fear with the lights out. You can see it's very dark behind me. And one final point as well, clearly this is not without risk for the Israeli military too. As the spokesperson was just referring to, he was asked about the death of 2 Israeli soldiers who their death has been announced today, along with 2 who were severely injured. And he was asked about how that happened, and it was interesting his reply, saying about how these troops are in sort of very close combat with the Hamas fighters that they are hunting down. And from our point here, we're not on the ground, so it's very hard independently to report on exactly how the operation is unfolding. But from where we are here, about 2 miles away from the border, from the fence, you can hear often the sounds of gunfire, the sounds of artillery. You can hear and see the impact of the airstrikes. There you could probably heard that explosion then. It's clearly very much an active and very dangerous war zone.
Well, Deborah Haynes there with the latest from Israel. Those reports of an attack will, of course, intensify the debate in the Labour Party over its position on Gaza. We'll hear from Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan, who has broken with the party and called for an immediate ceasefire. Plus, Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey will be here a bit later in the programme. But still to come on the Politics Hub. A U-turn on closing ticket offices in England after uproar from unions, charities and passenger groups. That story next.
There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. We have some breaking news now. Palestinian Authority are saying that 81 Gazans are allowed to cross into Egypt for medical treatment. We'll bring more on that when we get it. Well, it was a very busy day over on our Digital Politics Hub, and today's a great example of how useful it can be if you're out and about like I was in getting the news on a big political story. Let's start with this one, the COVID inquiry. Everything you need to know, it's all here, so you don't have to watch it all day, or maybe you can't. Everything you need to know. WhatsApps, the sweary ones as well, emails, instant analysis, all there rolling throughout the day. Invaluable tool, I found it so anyway. While the inquiry was going on, the government also announced this. You've got this here. The XL bully dogs are going to be banned in England and Wales after the rise in attacks involving the breed, which we've seen over the last year or so. And that ban is going to be introduced in 2 stages and will mean new rules for people who currently have XL bully dogs. So you can read all of the details of what's going to happen in the Politics Hub. And there's been a lot of speculation about when Rishi Sunak might call a general election. Here we go. You can have a look at this Politics Hub story here. Now, it matters a lot to me and my family because I'm trying to work out, can I go on holiday next year? We're ruling out May, October and even December because the Prime Minister has got until, dare I say it, January the 25th for that 2025 for that general election to be held. You can read all about it there on the Politics Hub. So to read all of that and much more, scan the QR code to catch up with all the latest on the Hub throughout the day. Now, it was only last month that the Prime Minister was on a trip to India when he was asked about plans by train operators to close nearly all railway station ticket offices in England. Mr Sunak answered that it was the right thing to do. Our railway network needed to be modernised, he said. It was the right thing for the British public and taxpayers. Well, today we found out those plans are not happening. Let's go live to our political correspondent, Gurpreet Nawan, who's outside Waterloo Station in central London for us tonight. Gurpreet, quite a big U-turn. What's going on?
Yeah, ministers clearly underestimated the extent of the backlash that these plans would attract. They certainly didn't expect that it would draw the biggest ever response to a consultation, with 750,000 people writing in, 99% of them opposing it. And to put that in context, Beth, that's more than 3 times the number of people who responded to the 2012 consultation on equal marriage, and almost 4 times the number who wrote in for the 2016 consultation on the BBC Charter. The plan was to close almost every ticket booth in the country, including at major stations such as Manchester Piccadilly, Paddington and London Waterloo, where I am today. And for the train companies, by extension the government, you can see the temptation, because just 12% of tickets are sold at these booths, and they're looking for savings because the railways still haven't recovered from the pandemic. The Treasury is having to pump in an extra 175 million a year just to keep the service running. So you can see why the temptation was there. And the train companies tried to sell it to the public by saying that it would free up ticket booth officers who could then work in stations and on platforms, but the public, they weren't buying it. This has really riled people up. A community issue playing out on a national level, akin to frustration over bank closures and ATM closures and post office closures. And so the government clearly determined that it wasn't an issue worth fighting in the run-up to a general election.
Gurpreet there, thank you. Well, still to come on the Politics Hub. News tonight that dozens of people have been killed in an explosion at a refugee camp inside Gaza will intensify divides in the Labour Party over the Middle East. I've been speaking to Sadiq Khan, the most senior Labour figure, to break ranks with Sir Keir Starmer and call for an immediate ceasefire. He's coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. In the last hour, we've had the news that 81 seriously injured Gazans are to be allowed to cross into Egypt for medical treatment. That news comes as Sir Keir Starmer today gave a speech defending his stance on the increasingly divisive question of a ceasefire in Gaza and denied that the issue is tearing his party apart. The Labour leader is refusing to back a permanent ceasefire because he argues that could allow Hamas to attack Israel again. Play it down all he likes. Anger over the issue is palpable. Pro-Palestinian protesters gathered outside the speech venue and shouted shame and you're a disgrace at Keir Starmer as he left. And several senior Labour figures, including Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham, and some in the shadow cabinet, have split from the party position too and called for an immediate ceasefire. We'll hear from the London Mayor, the most senior Labour figure to publicly break ranks over the issue shortly. Plus, Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey will be here in just a moment. But first, Sky's political correspondent Tamara Cohen has this report.
Keir Starmer, shame on you! Palestinians are humans too!
The crisis in the Middle East has inflamed strong passions back home and divisions within the Labour Party. After several of his shadow ministers called for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, Keir Starmer decided to set out in a speech why he won't.
While I understand calls for a ceasefire at this stage, I do not believe that it is the correct position now. That would leave Hamas with the infrastructure and the capability to carry out the sort of attack we saw on October the 7th.
But will this heal Labour's divisions?
Would you accept that this issue is tearing your party apart? You have made clear you don't support a ceasefire. If senior figures in your party continue to call for one, will they face any consequences?
Tamara, on tearing the party apart, I think it's very important to recognise the unity in the Labour Party on the key issues. There's unity in trying to bring about an alleviation of the awful situation in Gaza. It is my responsibility to ensure collective responsibility. I accept that, and we do need collective responsibility, and I take that duty extremely seriously.
We're told Keir Starmer made this speech to set out where he stands as the leader of the party likely to be in government. Those close to him say he wasn't making a threat to those who disagree and will continue to engage. But dissent in his party is growing, and how he handles it will be a key leadership test.
Hopefully it's not going to cause that much friction at a local level.
This Labour councillor is one of several to resign her post over this issue and urges MPs to keep up the pressure.
There's definitely space to put pressure on internally in the party. I think that a lot of the pressure that we've been able to do externally has also meant that there's been a shift in the language, a shift in the way that the Labour Party has started to speak about this conflict. And we saw some of that, some balance today, different to what we've heard previously from Keir Starmer. And I hope that part of that is, the many of us who've stepped down and started to push against the narrative that the Labour Party has been playing.
3 weeks on from the horrifying attacks of October 7th, triggering a war which could reshape the region, can the man who hopes to be Prime Minister hold the line? Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
Tamara Cohen there. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey. John, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Now, first up, you'll have heard the news in the past few moments that seriously injured Gazans, 81 people, are going to be allowed through the Rafah crossing into Egypt for medical treatment. You must welcome the news, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it, in what is needed?
We certainly welcome it, and let's hope this is an indication that some of what must happen, which is a greater flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza to civilians there, space for more of the hostages as well to come out, and the restoration of basic essential services to the civilian population in Gaza are properly in place and restored as well.
But John, I mean, the Labour position is this: no ceasefire. Israel has a right to defend itself. Strikes should continue in order to degrade Hamas infrastructure. In the meantime, the Gaza Health Ministry say there have been over 8,000 deaths. Can you, in good conscience, still hold this line? Shouldn't you think again?
Well, I mean, we're all anguished when we see the images of what's happening in Gaza. Everybody wants to see a reduction in the humanitarian suffering of the innocent Palestinians. And Keir Starmer said in his speech today that you've just reported on, he totally understands why people are arguing for a ceasefire. We want to see the alleviation of suffering. Everyone in Labour wants to see that. But he says, and the important argument he was making there is a ceasefire is not for now the correct approach for two reasons. First of all, any ceasefire freezes a conflict, and therefore Hamas fighters, weaponry, command centres would still all be in place.
But it stops the killing.
And secondly, what we all want to see, which is more aid, less civilian casualties, and a reduction in the conflict, can best and most likely be secured by a break in the fighting or humanitarian pauses. And that's something that important allies like the US and the European Union also
Well, this is it,
are arguing.
isn't it, that he really, rather this is about him wanting to be seen as a Prime Minister in waiting that doesn't want to break ranks with what the UK government are doing or the US government. That's what's going on, isn't it?
No, he's arguing both from a principled and a practical point of view, and it was an important speech today. He's saying he understands why people are calling for a ceasefire, but what people want to see is an alleviation of the suffering of Palestinians, and in these circumstances, respecting Israel's right to self-defence, balanced by the basic human right of Palestinians to not to suffer, the best, most likely way of trying to achieve this, any sort of break, will be humanitarian pauses and not a ceasefire.
John, Keir Starmer is out of step with his party and he's out of step with public opinion over a ceasefire. Is this the biggest crisis of his leadership?
No, it's not. What he was doing today was important. He was setting out the single common purpose.
Because the party is splitting. You've had over 20 councillors resign. You've got people on resignation watch. You've got the London Labour Mayor disagreeing with him publicly, as has the Manchester Mayor, as has the leader of Scottish Labour. Are you telling me that's not a leadership crisis?
So the single common concern in the Labour Party, and more widely, and in the public...
You don't think that this is a problem for him?
Part of the reason for his speech is he wants to give fresh leadership to this. He wants to explain why he takes
he does acknowledge it's a problem.
Of course. And one of the reasons is he wants to set out the arguments. He wants to bring people together. He wants to emphasise the single common concern we've got for the reduction of civilian casualties, getting more aid into Gaza and more hostages out. The area that we share in common is much greater than the difference over tactics. And his judgment for now, for two reasons, is that a call for ceasefire is not the right approach. And that's partly because it would allow Hamas fighters and threat to remain in place, to menace Israel in the future. And secondly, the most likely way of getting what we want to achieve is through breaks in fighting and the sort of developments we've seen, very welcome developments with seriously ill Gazans being allowed out of Gaza for proper treatment.
And just finally, collective responsibility. It seems like if you're on the Labour front bench, you can say what you want to say about this. I mean, collective cabinet responsibility, shadow cabinet responsibility in front, it's broken down, hasn't it? Can't enforce it because he's going to end up having to sack people.
No, it's not.
He can't enforce it, John. What Keir
Starmer's done today is an act and a speech of leadership. He wants to pull people together. He wants to make the arguments that the best way of achieving what we all want to see is not by a ceasefire. But he also has been very clear today, a political party, and he requires collective responsibility, and that's important too.
So just finally, very quickly, if someone in the shadow cabinet publicly disagrees with the position that Keir Starmer has set out, should they resign from the shadow cabinet?
Well, I hope the arguments that he set out...
should they, though? If there's collective responsibility.
Let's see. He's made important principled and practical arguments today in a way that we haven't seen from any other leader, including from Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. He wants to bring people together, but he will require collective responsibility because any political party does require that in the future.
That suggests to me that you're telling your shadow cabinet to not speak out. John, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. John Healey there. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to London Mayor Sadiq Khan, who has broken ranks with the leadership and called for a ceasefire. I began by asking him for his reaction to the Home Secretary's description of pro-Palestinian marches as hate marches.
No, I don't. Look, I'm quite clear. A cornerstone of our democracy is the ability to protest, to lobby your MP, your politicians, to email them, to go to their surgeries, to get involved in civic society. By and large, over the last 3 weeks, the hundreds of thousands of people who have been protesting have been doing it in a peaceful, lawful and safe way. I accept a small minority may have acted outside the law. There may be a grey area. What the Home Secretary should be doing is listening to her commissioner, who has said quite clearly the government should be stepping in, providing clarity in relation to laws around extremism.
Do you think she is stoking divisions, therefore, by describing these protests as hate marches?
Look, I'm also quite clear. I've met Jewish Londoners who are scared.
So she has got a point. She has got a point.
I've met Muslim Londoners who are scared.
Has she got a point, do you think?
Well, we've seen an increase in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. She should be bringing people together, explaining, look, you can have strong views that are pro-Palestinian, but you must not be anti-Semitic. You can have strong views supporting the government of Israel, but you can also have sympathy and empathy for those in Gaza. Why not bring people together and unite our society rather than seeking to divide people by posturing?
Divisions in Labour too. Keir Starmer is currently giving a speech rebutting you and others who are demanding a ceasefire. You think he's getting this wrong?
Listen, there's a whole host of issues in the Middle East that Keir and I agree on. The importance of humanitarian aid, the importance of food, water, essential supplies getting through, the importance of de-escalation, the importance to condemn unequivocally Hamas, the importance to get international players involved. My view is very simple in relation to what's happening in the Middle East, which I think, like many other countries around the world, like the humanitarian aid agencies, I think there should be a ceasefire.
Yeah, so on the matter of a ceasefire, quite a fundamental thing you disagree on with him. You think he's getting it wrong?
It's not a question of getting it wrong or right. I think there should be...
76% of the public, if you look at polling, says they would back a ceasefire.
Well, you look at any major conflict across the globe, historically, but also in more recent times, you resolve things by peaceful resolution rather than by an escalation of violence. As we speak, and by the time this is aired, the numbers are going to change. More than 9,000 people lost their life in Gaza, more than 1,400 in Israel, more than 200 hostages taken from Israel by Hamas, a terrorist organisation. More than 2,000 children have been killed. For goodness sake, Gaza is heartbreaking, but it is a consequence of the Israeli government's action.
What's your message to Keir Starmer? Think again.
Listen, Keir and I speak all the time.
No, what's your message
The medium of the sky to give Keir a message.
But you disagree. Look, but to be clear, you disagree with him. You think he should go further than asking for a humanitarian pause. I'm
really not going to get into what Keir should be doing. He's done a great job transforming our party and a great job showing leadership on a whole host of issues, including this one.
And he has a huge lead in the polls, but now there is a division in the Labour Party. His authority has been challenged by you, by the leader of Scottish Labour, by the Manchester Mayor, all leading figures in the party calling for a ceasefire. He won't do it. This is a problem.
Well, what's important is I've been quite clear in relation to my views in relation to the ceasefire, at the same time as supporting the Israeli government's attempts to get back the hostages, as well as at the same time condemning unequivocally the actions of Hamas, but also making it quite clear those people suffering in Gaza need our support, and the best way to give them support, in addition to the humanitarian aid and the essential supplies, is a ceasefire.
OK, I have to ask you about ULEZ. You've put your a month in, a report's gone out today. There's lots on money raised, £26 million on the when you've extended to Outer London, and compliance of vehicles. There's not much in there on improving air quality. Isn't that the point, or is it a revenue raiser for you? So a lot of Londoners think.
The decision to expand the ULEZ was a difficult one, but I think it was the right thing to do. Why? Because the evidence is quite clear. Air pollution causes around 4,000 deaths a year prematurely in our city. is the children having stunted lungs forever, and adults with a whole host of health issues from asthma to dementia, heart disease to cancer. Early results show the ULEZ is working, the expansion is working. Why? Because 95% of vehicles seen driving on an average day in central London, in London, and importantly in outer London are now compliant. Why is that important? Because fewer non-compliant vehicles, a reduction of almost 80,000, means the air is cleaner. So 9 million Londoners are breathing clean air.
Sadiq Khan. Well, let's get reaction from Guto Harri and John McDonnell. John, can I come to you first? Keir Starmer, is he facing a leadership crisis over the divisions in Labour?
It's not a leadership crisis, but it is a problem because the solution that he's putting forward of a pause, people just don't believe in, and it won't hold, and we know that. And the issue is, what does a pause mean? I mean, a pause maybe a few hours, maybe a day, but then after that the bombing starts all over again and the land invasion. We've lost 8,000 civilians so far, 3,000 children. Land invasion and bombing continuing. We could between 10 and 20,000 civilian casualties. People aren't willing to countenance that. That's why the argument for a ceasefire is coming forward.
OK. You said it won't hold. So where does he go from here? What's he doing? Is it a holding position? Is he going to have to change position? Are you going to put the pressure on for him to change position?
I think that within the Labour Party and beyond, throughout our movement, you've seen the majorities that there are in favour of a ceasefire. I think actually that's going to be the common view within society overall, already showing in the polls. And I think the politics of this are going to shift. The demand for the ceasefire will grow because of the casualties, and Keir will have to reflect that.
It's interesting you're saying that because it's pretty clear when I talk to people around him that they're very keen that he doesn't break the line with the US and UK governments.
Look,
you're saying you don't think it's going to hold. He's going to have to move.
I think there's a real lesson for Keir in leadership here. He cannot just tuck behind the Americans. We need a leader in this country that actually does demonstrate they understand what's happening on the ground, the need for a ceasefire. And actually, those people who are advisors around him you speak to, I think they've badly served him over this period. There's been blunder after blunder, starting with the LBC interview, not apologising immediately, the trip to the mosque, and then one of his team putting out an inappropriate tweet, the handling of Andy McDonnell the other day. I think he needs to look at the team around him, because at the moment we're in opposition. If this was happening in government, it could be disastrous.
Just quickly, what you're saying is you think he will have to change position and demand a more permanent ceasefire?
I think it's inevitable because people will not countenance the loss of 10 to 20,000 civilians on this. And the pressure on Israel will be immense. And I think Israel needs to think again as well about losing world opinion too.
Guto, what do you think? I mean, he wants to be Prime Minister, but is Keir Starmer failing to show leadership?
No, and I don't think anyone should be seeking any party advantage in this. We've all got hung up on the C word for understandable reasons in this context. But I think what he was saying loud and clear today is what everyone wants to hear, and what Rishi Sunak is doing from a slightly different angle, and James Cleverly has done very shrewdly throughout, is saying, do not kill innocent civilians, do not create a humanitarian catastrophe. Because guess what? That's a bad thing in itself. And it's not even good for Israel, because if you want to motivate the next generation of angry young men to join the likes of Hamas, go ahead and do it this way. So it's in Israel's
proposal that enable that to happen.
It's in Israel's interest for this not to happen. And he was trying to go there, but clearly it's difficult for him because the connotations of ceasefire
I completely understand the difficulties, but I don't think he fully understands the process of ceasefire. We've been around a long while. I've been in Parliament nearly 26 years now, and I've experienced the war decisions that are taking place. What happens in the start of a ceasefire is international pressure builds, mediators start their work, then you do get the call for a ceasefire, but with something in return. I'm worried about the hostages with regard to the land invasion. There's a potential in a ceasefire you could get the hostages free, and then you start the real peace process. That has to be understood, because that's the way we've dealt with it so often in the past.
And it's hard to argue that, but the counter which Keir did sort of articulate, I thought, quite shrewdly today, is that it does leave the people who started the recent round of this, shall we say, in a position where they're protected by the ceasefire.
No, that's part of the ceasefire
Right, John,
negotiations.
I'm going to
You'd
have to go
expect
to a
something
break, but very quickly, I just want to ask you before I do, resignations, you're plugged into the party. Do you think we're going to see more resignations from members of your
Keir's trying to
party?
manage it and say, let's have a respectful but sincere debate. But if he holds to this line, I think it becomes inevitable.
So is that a yes?
Yes.
OK, thank you. Right, I want to carry on, but I can't. I've got to go to a break. But don't go anywhere, because still to come on the Politics Hub. Ahead of giving evidence to the COVID inquiry, Dominic Cummings tweeted an extraordinary clip of Matt Hancock being abused on reality TV from the weekend. At first I thought it was a spoof, but it is real. Are politicians just desperate attention seekers? We're talking that about politics becoming celebrities next.
Well, about 5 years, my dad started putting pumpkins on a pyramid, and I thought it was a daft idea. And then people seemed to like the displays and take pictures. So this year, we ended up doing Nightmare Before Christmas. So there's 10,000 pumpkins and squash, actually. So the blue ones are Crown Prince squash. We do always ask the public each year what they would like to see on the pyramid. The top answer was actually the lionesses, but we couldn't make the Halloween link. So the next best one was Nightmare Before Christmas. And given that it's Tim Burton's 30th anniversary of the film, that's what we decided to do. And what we do, we get lots of the younger event staff and lots of telehandlers and JCBs, and we throw the pumpkins to each other and pop them on the pyramid. But generally, squash tastes a lot nicer. The pumpkins that you get at Halloween aren't so good for eating because they're generally grown for being big. If you want an eating pumpkin, you'll get the baby bear pumpkin. Many people know the butternut squash, but they should really branch out to the blue Crown Prince or maybe the red onion squash. They're a lot tastier, very versatile. Soups, roast, bake them. They really are fantastic. All the blue ones and then the gemmelette outline, which is one of the staple foods in South Africa, they last for many months. So all of those get eaten. The pumpkins themselves, the orange ones, we chop up as many as we can for pumpkin soup, which gets mixed with the squash in a pumpkin soup. So most get eaten, some get rotted, but we are a farm. They go straight back into the compost heap and straight as an organic matter into the ground. So we don't spray on our ground, but it's just a natural fertilizer for the soil.
Welcome back. Now, ahead of his evidence today, Dominic Cummings tweeted a clip of Matt Hancock being abused on reality show Celebrity SAS in a foul-mouthed tirade from a mock interrogator saying she speaks for England. The thing is, Dom, I reckon Matt was probably pleased with getting a mention. In my experience, politicians crave the limelight, like some journalists, not me, of course, crave the bar. They're laughing, I don't know why. Yet, they say politics is showbiz for ugly people. So we thought we'd bring you some of the most memorable attempts politicians made to become celebrities with varying success.
Good looking, bad tasting, full bodied, but wasted, loose living, tight fitting. What you see ain't what you are getting. Look at me.
Oh, you're not talking now. Now you don't want to talk about it, do you?
You haven't asked me a question.
Oh, you sarcastic little... Wants to talk and talk and talk and talk about what he wants to talk about. Doesn't want to talk about this.
No, I'm trying to work out what you're getting at.
What to do? You might have seen the news. I'm a celebrity. Get me out of here. The Sun put it on the front page yesterday. Nigel's going into the jungle.
Come on and look at me.
Would you like me to be the cat?
Yes, please.
I mean, I can barely speak. Let's pick up with our very own reality stars, Guto and John. I've literally only got a minute left. Come on, which was the best, what was the worst? Guto?
I've got to say that what Matt Hancock showed was the training that is needed to be able to work with Dominic Cummings. You've got to be able to stand there, suck it up, and be sworn at and battered. And we've all learned that that was the deal in number 10. Appalling there is.
John, would you ever do I'm a Celebrity, Strictly Come On? You must have been asked.
I've been asked a number of times on different things. I've declined them all. They were excruciating. Mind you, it worked for Ed Balls, didn't it, with his dancing? He enjoyed that.
I was going to say, is he the only one that's actually made it successful?
I think so.
There's a lot of them presenting TV shows now.
Oh, that's true.
There's
a lot of them presenting TV shows these days, yeah.
And your former boss is about to do
he
GB
is indeed.
News?
GB News. We all wish him well.
Oh, God.
We always do.
That's a morgue, though, isn't it? Really?
Anyway, I need to wrap the show now, fortunately, before we go there. Guto, John, thank you so much for joining us on the Politics Hub. We've run out of time. It's all for tonight. Join SJ up next.